Hi everyone, welcome to week 8 of Life Under Quarantine. How are you doing? How has your life changed over the last 2 months? Does it feel like life has slowed down and become simpler, or does it feel like you're busier than ever? The strange thing about life under quarantine is that our usual routines have been disrupted. We seem to have more opportunities for rest, yet for many rest still feels very elusive. Organizational psychologist and Wharton professor Adam Grant estimates that the average person working from home has had their workday extended by 2 to 3 hours. Boundaries between work and home have been demolished, and our home, which used to be a refuge from work, is now keeping us captive to more work. I laughed really hard this last week when I read this tweet from Kevin Varzad. My favorite part about quarantine is that we were all forced to be alone with our thoughts for a little bit. And everyone was like, absolutely not. I will learn to bake bread from scratch. I confess I'm part of the bake at home trend, and I'm partly responsible for the shortage of flour and yeast in the grocery store. And while I've had fun experimenting and learning how to bake at home, this activity doesn't really qualify as rest for me. My own personal definition of rest is a complete pause, turning off my drive to be efficient and productive, to step away from responsibility, shifting from giving and doing to being and receiving. And I don't know what your personal definition of rest is, but I do know that we all need it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what are some enemies of rest and what are my personal strategies for finding rest in a very busy time. You might have a different definition for rest, and rest might look really different for you, but I'm convinced that we all need it. Scripture tells us to make every effort to enter into God's rest. We know that times of rest help us to replenish our resources emotionally, physically, mentally. But rest is so elusive and challenging for many of us. And this last week I came up with a list of what I think are common enemies of rest. There's that taskmaster in your head that tells you that you're not done working, that you haven't worked enough to deserve time to rest, and makes you feel guilty. There's the need to please people. There's a lack of boundaries that leads us to say yes to other people's needs and other people's requests. Lack of trust in other people or in God, and believing that if we don't do it, it won't get done. Sometimes it's disconnection from our own bodies and not understanding the signals that it's sending us that we are exhausted and need to slow down and rest. There is also a lot of distorted thinking in our culture around rest. Rest is for weak, undisciplined people. The busier you are, the more important you must be. We must continue to achieve and perform in order to be worthy. Even the technology that we rely on to keep us connected can become an enemy of rest. Having work emails at our fingertips 24/7 make it really hard to step away and enjoy rest. Once we acknowledge the challenges of finding rest and we identify those personal enemies of rest for ourselves, we can also come up with strategies for finding rest in our daily lives. One of my personal strategies is physical separation from home, from work, sometimes even from my family and responsibilities. I like to pick up a drink and a book and maybe sit by the pool. I love 9 innings of baseball, where my world seems to slow down and get smaller. For extended periods of rest, I like to pack a backpack and go hiking and camping, completely off the grid, away from technology, away from my family and all responsibilities. Life under quarantine has looked really different for us. One of our new rituals for rest is beers on the driveway every afternoon. We know that around 5 or 6 o'clock, we're going to put away our computers. We're going to set up our folding chairs on the driveway, maybe play some wiffle ball or throw a frisbee. But that is our signal that it's time to rest. Everyone is different, and what works for me may not work for you. But I hope you'll spend some time and pause this week to ask yourself, what does rest look like? What are your personal enemies of rest? And what are some strategies for you to find rest? Thanks so much for joining us today and for considering how to build rhythms of rest into your life.